Round number 1 in the 2023 Formula 1 Championship has come to a close. The Bahrain Grand Prix has just finished and we're going to jump into a race review. Round 1 is out the way and we've got 21 more races to go, and I plan to do a review for every single race this season. So if you guys want to see more of this content, let me know in the comments down below, as this is a new series on the channel and I want to kind of get some input and some feedback. Now with that said, I've written down some notes. I've got a few things I kind of wrote down during the race and kind of things that, came to mind at the time, and we're going to basically go through a race recap. So to give the video some structure, we're going to basically run team by team. I'm not going to kind of review the race. I'm sure you guys would have seen it by now or may have seen the highlights. So I'm just going to jump into kind of each team, each driver, and things that stood out to me in this race. So let's go team by team, and we're going to start off with Red Bull Racing. Max Verstappen P1, Checo P2, 1-2 finish. Red Bull look super strong and ominous for the season, as they looked essentially bulletproof. However, let's talk about in more detail. Checo, of course, lost second place on lap 1. Leclerc got the measure of him and actually, to be fair, held on for the most part, and Ferrari did what they could with their tyre wear limitations. Red Bull ultimately seemed to be able to make any tyre work and also last much longer than anybody else, and ultimately Perez was able to get back ahead of Leclerc and finish in second place. Max was super dominant, very much in control, and yeah, Red Bull look comfortably the team to beat right now. However, I'll say one thing: I don't think they're super fast in the race. I just think they're very consistent, and there's a big difference here. I don't think their overall pace is that spectacular, as we saw in qualifying yesterday as well. The gaps weren't that big. I just think the Red Bull, when it's in that working window, it's unbeatable in the sense that it just has no tyre wear. It's super consistent. It can make the softs, the mediums, or the hards work just as good, and they don't have any big drop off or inconsistency, whereas other teams are struggling a bit more with that. Now we'll go to Aston Martin next, and literally I wrote down one thing in my notes, and literally all I wrote down was Fernando is 41 years old. Guy is just incredible. I mean, the level he drives at is insane. The move he put on Hamilton was the move of the race, and the move of the race, and maybe the move in some time. That genuinely, that was a really unorthodox move we don't really see often, and that's kind of the level Alonso operates at. When you give him a car that can compete, that's what he can do. As for their race, Alonso P3, Stroll in a fantastic P6, and let me quickly just give Stroll his flowers, man. Literally, this guy had wrist surgery 12 days ago, screws in his wrist, been in pain all weekend, had no pre-season whatsoever, just turned up this weekend and finished on the road 8 to 10 seconds behind Alonso, and had really good pace and held on the whole time. Mixed it with the Mercs, and genuinely, if he was at 100%, possibly could have actually been in a little bit higher and possibly challenged Sainz and Hamilton. I will say, Lance had one sticky moment on lap 1 into turn 4 where he almost T-boned his teammate and essentially, got things off to a rocky start in the very first race. And luckily, the Aston Martin front wing seems to be bulletproof, and the rear tyres as well. So yeah, very lucky escape there, but that was a bit of a possibly lack of, pre-season, lack of racecraft from Lance. Misjudgment, Alonso going for the cutback, of course, on Hamilton. Stroll misread, too focused on his own battle with Russell, and they had that contact. Luckily, no major harm. Now we're going to talk about Ferrari next, as they were up and down this race, but for the most part looked fine until Charles Leclerc's engine went down or had an electrical issue or something towards the end, and unfortunately DNF'd. He was on for a third place finish, and I think it would have been very close between him and Fernando for that podium, because Alonso's pace was really strong at the end, and he also kind of backed off because he was managing tyres at the end once he got into third place. And Leclerc would have naturally just struggled as the race went on, as Ferrari does have some tyre deg issues. However, I will say for the most part, Leclerc impressed me today. I thought he had a great start and kept Checo at bay, for the most part, and done what he could. I think, again, they've got tyre deg issues, but he done a much better job today of managing that and actually stayed quite competitive, whereas Carlos did struggle with tyre wear. He managed at the end to kind of just improve a little bit and find something as he kept Hamilton behind in that battle, but for the most part, Sainz did struggle a bit more than Leclerc with tyre wear, and Ferrari have work to do. They've also got a massive issue with Leclerc because this morning they changed, I believe, the control electronics on his car as a precaution, and possibly what went wrong or what he lost in the race was his second control electronics, and you only get 2 of those in a season. So if they can't recover any of the 2, Leclerc could be on for a penalty already in the very next race, which is terrible because that's going to knock on throughout the entire season. I tweeted it at the time, a team principle change is not going to fix those kind of issues. One thing they have changed and improved, I noticed in the race, their pit stops are fantastic today. I'm not sure if it will continue the whole season, but for the most part, a big improvement. They've struggled massively with pit stops. They're way off the pace. They're always half a second to a second slower than Red Bull, and even back to when Seb was racing, they always had bad stops. Today it was slick. Every stop 2.5 or under, and they even double stacked, and it was super smooth. So credit where credit is due. Now, we talked about tyre wear, and this one was a big surprise. Mercedes-Benz struggled today. Hamilton at the flag, P5, Russell P7. To be fair, their pace wasn't a million miles off. Again, it's very close between Aston Martin, Ferrari and Mercedes. I feel like Aston Martin have the ultimate pace, but their 1 lap pace lets them down a bit, and also Stroll wasn't 100%. Alonso had a poor first lap, but for the most part, those 3 teams are very close. But the big surprise to me was Mercedes and their tyre wear today. The first stint on the soft tyre, they lost the tyres incredibly fast. They fell off the cliff. They were the first team to really struggle on rubber. And also at the end, when it looked like Hamilton was going to get Sainz because Sainz was really struggling, Hamilton started to fall off and wasn't able to get past in the end. So Merc, besides having possibly a car that isn't good enough, and Toto Wolff admitting the other day they're going to change design concepts already, they seem to have a tyre wear issue, which wasn't in the script. Now after this, we're going to talk about the midfield, and we're going to keep this relatively short on just a few things that kind of stood out to me rather than going into detail with every single driver and team. Now today, 8th place, Valtteri Bottas. Very good performance to be fair. I was quite surprised. Alfa Romeo have been a bit off the pace this weekend and hasn't really been what people expect in terms of pace, but Valtteri turned up today, and I think credit to him. If you look at Zhou, who was a bit lost, pretty decent race for Valtteri, and also mixed it up with Alonso and Hamilton at times, early on. So he was actually relatively on pace in the first half of the race and kind of fell off a little bit at the end, but actually did okay. Now Bottas just finished ahead of Pierre Gasly, who finished in an incredible P9. What a debut for Pierre. Alpine have looked very lost since pre-season. I don't know where they really stand. Pre-season was a bit of a mystery. They never used the soft tyres, never done race runs, and even this weekend they seemed off the pace. But today they turned up. Admittedly, only 1 car turned up, but still, Pierre Gasly, you know what, mate? Well done, great performance. If I had a ranking this race for driver of the day, Stroll is P1 for me, Alonso P2, and then Gasly P3. But those 3 today were just fantastic. Credit where credit is due. Gasly finished P9, starting from P20, whereas Esteban Ocon started P9 and finished in P18. What a horrible race for Esteban here today, the team as well, getting it all wrong. And it wasn't just bad luck or mistakes, it was rookie errors. You make one of these mistakes, fair enough, but they've done multiple of these errors this race, and it just made no sense whatsoever. Especially the grid slot, calculating the penalty wrong in terms of time, just really, unprofessional from them. And I did predict Gasly would finish ahead of Ocon this season in the championship, and we'll see what happens. But Gasly with a very strong first race. Another surprise today, Williams. They got a point. Alex Albon, P10, what a performance. And not just him, Logan Sargent genuinely impressed me. I predicted in my season predictions that he would be the flop, or the driver that impresses the least, and he proved me wrong straight away in one race. Although it is a long season, still, fair play Logan, what a performance. P10, P12 for them today. They get a point, and they were genuinely competitive in that midfield battle, and they looked very strong. Now Albon started P15 and straight away at the race start got to P11 and basically held it for the whole race, and then with Leclerc's retirement that moved him into the top 10. And Sargent, by the way, also great, P16 to P12, similar situation really. Very good race from both of them here today. And then finally, just a few more points to close out. Yuki Tsunoda, P11, just missed out on the top 10, but low-key had a very decent race. And also, I thought he would be better than Nick De Vries, and that was true. I thought Yuki showed some real maturity today in his driving, and also in wheel-to-wheel combat, but just generally, the gap to De Vries was also pretty fair. I think, it showed that now Yuki's in his 3rd season and he's kind of developing a bit into a better driver and has that maturity on his side. And then finally, just to kind of close out the video and a few more notes I wrote down, Nico Hülkenberg, you know, poor race. Fantastic qualifying, but poor race. I think the fact he's been out of the car for 3 years did show a little bit in terms of the racecraft. He lost 5 places on the first lap, which was the most by any driver, whereas Albon, for example, gained 4 places. So, you know, that kind of contrast makes a big difference in the midfield battle where things are so close. It did generally seem like Haas were quite poor today, actually, in the race. I mean, also Magnussen had no pace, and they were kind of just dropping down the order. And similar to them, McLaren, man, it's not looking good. I mean, I will admit they were unlucky in the sense that reliability played a part because their pace wasn't as catastrophic as maybe it seems, but for the most part, they're going to be struggling to even get points, I think, this season because there's other teams that just seem a bit stronger, and I think it's going to be a tough time for them. So, yeah, McLaren have got work to do. Piastri, of course, DNF with a steering wheel issue where, you know, he couldn't properly downshift, and also Lando having some sort of, I think, air pressure problem because we saw the valve go into the side pod during the pit stop. So, yeah, just about unfortunate, really. But Lando did keep up with, you know, Hamilton and Sainz throughout the entirety of the end of the race there. So it did show some pace and promise. But either way, a really bad day at the office for McLaren and Haas, in my opinion. But there we go then, guys. That is it. Essentially, my takeaways and things I picked up on in the race, in the review. You know, I could have spoken about the whole race from top to bottom in detail, but you guys have, well, I hope you've seen it. So I'm essentially, you know, kind of reacting and giving my thoughts and opinions to it. But I will say one thing. We've got obviously Red Bull at the top. Very close battle for second in terms of Ferrari, Aston Martin and Mercedes. That essentially locks out the top 8 spots. And then there's obviously P9 and P10 up for grabs, which seems to be between Alpine, Alfa Romeo possibly, maybe Williams, but we'll see. But definitely Alfa Romeo and Alpine, I think, in my opinion, because Ocon had a really poor race, but it shouldn't always be like that. I think it was a bit of a one-off. And then I think we've got some other battles, you know, in the midfield lower down. So I think Williams, AlphaTauri are pretty close, and you've got Haas as well, McLaren, I think. So it's going to be interesting, and also how things vary from race to race. The next one is Jeddah, another night race, similar sort of, I'd say, configuration, but this one definitely, I think, will be a bit more straight line speed dependent. We saw a great race last year with Leclerc and Verstappen in terms of dynamics on car setup, you know, with high downforce and low downforce. So we'll see how that goes. Either way, guys, a very good race, and yeah, big shout out to Stroll, Alonso and Gasly for being my top 2 drivers of this race. But if you enjoyed the video, leave a like and subscribe for more, guys. Like I said, it's a new series. I want to try and give this a go and see what you guys think. So give me your thoughts in the comments down below. Any comment is a good one for me because the algorithm helps me out a lot. And yeah, let me know your thoughts on the race. As always, a big shout out and plug to the channel members for supporting the content. As always, check out the 2 videos on screen, and I'll see all of you in the next one in Jeddah. Until then, take care, and let's goodbye from me.